Okay. Well, hi everybody. Welcome to an inside look, our 14th episode. And we are having a look at a piece titled In Gratitude, and it's by actually a great friend of the quartet for many years. It's Charles Nichols, and he is a violinist, composer, electronic computer music specialist, etc., etc. He does a lot of stuff.
I've had many great breakfasts, Charles.
Oh, yes. So where Charles is at Virginia Tech, and he teaches composition and computer music, and is involved in designing sound installations or putting sound in space, rendering data in sound. So like complex sets of data, you can just like listen to it and know what's going on, which, you know, I think that is very, very cool. There's a band modality, etc., etc. But Charles started, as a violinist, and his teacher is very well known as Charles Castleman. And what this piece is it joins kind of a long tradition, actually, of
the piece that we just played.
The one that we just introduced is In Gratitude. A very famous example of a composer saying thank you is Beethoven, having written for string quartet the Holy Song of Thanksgiving, which is in Opus 132. He became very ill. He got better. It's very Monty Python, and then but the movement is I've heard it performed maybe 3 times, and I learned the first time to bring a box of tissues because every time it starts to happen, the tears are coming down.
Monty Python.
As well, yes, as well. So anyway, Charles has written this piece In Gratitude as a way of saying thank you to Charles Castleman for providing so much that let Charles go on to do all of the things that he's done. And it's like, I think we all owe that to everybody who's come before us, as it goes and as it goes. So this piece is part of a recording project. Sean here is co-producer and engineer, and it will be available on Centaur Records in 2022.
Yeah, it's part of a larger project we're doing with Charles. This is the first piece that we've recorded. We have 2 more full pieces, possibly 3, for a full album of string quartets of Charles. So it's fun to get this first one in the can.
So we thought we would have a look at it and see about the great things that we can pull out from the piece. What's interesting about the piece is it's very simple. It's assembled from just a few building blocks that are recombined in different ways. And I thought that we could just play a bit, a little bit more of the first movement, and we'll put a score up on the screen so you guys can see what the material is and what's going on. Essentially, there's a long singing theme, and then a hocket is what it's called. It's when we come in at different times to form the accompaniment. And you'll be able to see on the score how this travels between the different parts. Okay, so let's give it a go. This would be rehearsal 2 through 6. So if you're a fan of the series, you've been building up your chops of how to listen to different parts of a piece. And really, I'm just going to challenge everyone that have a look at the score again and just rewind the episode a little bit and listen through and see if you can use your eyes and your ears to track this part as it goes through the group, and then do it again, and track this part as it goes through the group, and then do it again. And it's a way that I build my own listening chops, and it makes, classical music, gosh, if any genre is going to survive repeated listenings over and over and over again, the music has survived for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it offers this great sophistication. Let's have a look at the second movement, and oh boy. So a little bit of history for the second movement. We are not scared of hard stuff. We have performed Bartók quartets, Ligeti quartets. I counted recently more than 100 contemporary music premieres, and the composers, especially modern composers, are asking, can we use the instruments in more and more non-typical ways? And even the typical ways are very, very challenging. And through all of those pieces, we've always been able to do it. And I think it becomes we have a special relationship with the word impossible. Jason, I think you say it best. Can you tell us about the word impossible?
Oh my gosh, now that I'm on the spot, I don't know what I say. It just usually, I suppose, comes. I suppose I try to not use it unless... I suppose it depends on how deep you want to dig into something. Most things that I initially think are not possible, after a bit of, or a lot of time and effort, you might realize, okay, it is possible. The question is how, feasible, or how practical is it? I suppose that's maybe the route I would
probable?
Go. And also, well, that's a really important thing. How probable is it? Is maybe,
It's kind of it's a dangerous word, because if you use it, but then someone else figures out how to do it.
Yeah.
Well, then, it's a really hard word.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always kind of work.
Part of the reason I don't like it is, I suppose there have been plenty of times where I, found in a piece something that is really special or unique, something that, oh man, I've never heard this before, and it just sounds great. And then I might hear, oh, well, this person so-and-so said it was impossible. And I suppose that just sort of rubbed me the wrong way, because maybe what they meant was...
I don't want to do this.
I don't want to do this, or something, trying to figure out. And, that's fair, but then maybe say that, because I think also there's responsibility anytime you're working with a composer to be really honest about that stuff. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is maybe more... It's not even necessarily that they're wrong or anything. It's the baggage that it carries if you give that to someone, especially now Charles has been doing this for a long time and is a violinist, so he knows what's possible. So it's not necessarily for Charles, but let's say a younger composer.
Yeah. Well, I have a bit of confession, which is, after having played all the pieces that we've played, this is the first one where I was like, I don't know if it's going to happen. Like, for me, myself, I thought I might be close to using this word impossible. Mm-hmm. Now, it turned out, spoiler alert, it's not. But it was a journey to go through. Let's play this. Let's see what we're dealing with.
Okay.
Maybe the beginning until rehearsal 5. Sound that hard.
No, it doesn't.
No, it really doesn't. Yeah.
Why is it so hard? It's tricky because, well, this first technique, I'll show you my first. It's supposed to be 2 bounce notes and then a long note. this was my first attempt. There's a horrible, horrible skitter after the whole thing, and I thought, well, let's just keep trying. Let's just keep trying. Okay, what if I try this? What if I try this? Let's do it a little bit faster. Let's walk it back. Let's try a different part of the bow. Let's try different bowings this way and that way. And
well, and we should say that this is a very common bowing, ricochet, right?
yeah.
William Tell. I mean, I can think of so many things that's very common. So when you see it, it's a little like, oh, okay, fine. It's the last part that you're talking about that it attaches to a long held note after two.
Also, I think the hardest thing about what you're talking about is that third note has an accent.
Right.
The tenuto.
So for the non-string players, it's like I'm thinking of bouncing a basketball, and I don't know. I did this as a kid. You bounce the basketball, but then you try and shove it to the floor, and it just bounces faster and faster because it still has that energy. And like, how do you bounce a basketball and then tell it, stop, don't bounce anymore? And it's like, oh, physically that's pretty tricky.
Right, and we're using physics here. Like, anytime you use ricochet, the skill of ricochet isn't that difficult once you figure out that the bow wants to do it. It's the controlling it that can be tricky. So it's just, as you said, bouncing the basketball. There's a predictable pattern it goes. Now, what you don't expect to have is suddenly the third one to be louder, but that's
Yes.
exactly what has to happen.
And then on top of that, you have tempo, right? Because if it's a slower tempo, so the figure usually is the followed by eighth notes, and that last eighth note connects into another ricochet. So you don't have a lot of time. Now, if that's slower, you have time, but at the tempo, you have to get the grace notes technically within the speed of almost the 30-second note. So it's just like all of these little things combined to create something that looks simple on the page like the first movement, but it is not.
Can I throw in another added?
Oh,
Is it not
absolutely.
hard enough? I think the other
left hand.
The left hand
Yeah,
is
yeah,
really
yeah.
hard because
This is not a problem I have to deal with.
Oh, really?
In most of the time, because I can put my fingers straight across. But you guys don't really have that option.
Sure.
No, that's
Sure. To be clear for anybody watching, is our pitches are parallel fifths, which, by the way, are how our strings are tuned. Now, as Ryan was mentioning, because of the way he holds his instrument, it's actually really convenient for him to just block the finger across the chords and move it around. But it doesn't really. I mean, I suppose there's some. Again, I don't want to use the word impossible. There's someone out
It's
there
a
who can
bad
do this,
word.
right?
It's not probable.
It's not probable, and not to mention, as you had already said, Sean, afterwards
Yeah,
we have different notes. So you have this problem of dealing with intonation in a way that we often already don't have to. So it's just an added layer of difficulty.
And there's another one. Now, I have spent a fair amount of time playing electric bass for like a lot of the pop and rock stuff we did do it. And I suppose this comes naturally to an electric bass player, but one thing that I have to spend a lot of time working on is when I'm picking, figuring out that it's not just the finger that's picking the string, it's the other fingers that are keeping the strings that are not being used muted, because the resonance that comes from them really can affect a track, especially if you're in a specific key. This happens in this movement. Now, you're talking about these parallel fifths. I have those three notes.
Yes.
Now, if I just play that and not think about the dampening, what you hear,
Oh, sure.
you get this ring, but
Yeah.
we're in this key that does not make sense.
Right.
So not only do I have to do the bow thing, I have to do the sweeping of the finger to make it work, but I have to use other fingers to deaden the strings. Versus...
It matters because those extra ringing notes aren't part of the harmony.
They don't fit
They're
in
not
there.
part of the piece.
And
so,
it's just extra noise, and that if you have too much extra noise, then all of a sudden you stop hearing the really percussive quality. So I mean, look, it's very, very difficult.
And there's even another thing.
Oh,
Sorry, I know we keep adding, but just sort of make the point of how this is I remember playing this for Charles the first time. What does that allow me to do? Now, I'm thinking of it as being expressive, but it also means it's slightly more forgiving for the intonation.
You mean the vibrato?
I am vibrating. But as we found with Charles, actually he's looking for a slightly different style, which is, to sort of oversimplify it, part of that is no vibrato. which just means this awkward handshake we have to be very, very accurate with. All of this on top of, all of this would be hard on a solo piece, on your own. This is hard to do on your own. And I always tell, people when they're trying to understand the difficulty of playing string quartet is take whatever you're playing and multiply that difficulty times 4 is a really fair, I think, estimate of what it's like then to do that same thing accurately with everybody else and everybody else doing it the same way. So it's just like all these, layers. Notice we haven't used the word impossible yet.
No, and I really like the word that you said, layers, because I don't know how it happened for you guys, but for me it happened little by little. Oh, this is starting to sound a little better. Oh, how can I? The thing that stopped the skitter was remembering a masterclass with Eric Kim, who I believe was principal cellist. Was he in Cincinnati?
Sounds
think so.
right. Yeah.
He was teaching the Don Juan excerpt, and he said, "Hey, when you go to the A string, if you roll the bow in your fingers so that it goes like this, then it won't bounce." And I remembered that, and let me try that, and that's but it takes these. Point being, you can magnify the difficulties as much as possible. And how many times did I stop myself from calling and saying, I don't think this is going to work, because at the end of the day, we all figured it out. And it took a little while. And I believe you mentioned to this earlier, Jason, that when you're first confronting a difficulty, and this is a message to everybody who's trying, what is the problem? Is it that the piece is, you don't like the piece, you don't want to do this? Or is it just too much cognitive dissonance all at once? And just waiting until all of that turmoil subsides, and then it's all put together, and then finally...
And there has to be a final goal. Like in this case, I know Charles, I trust him, I know he has a great ear, he has good ideas. He, like you said, he is a violinist.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put the time in to figure out what this end goal is. And I have to say, with the final recording, I just heard the final mix the other day. It sounds very cool. No way would I have assumed this is how it was going to sound when I first started the tribulations.
Before we go on, can we play that exact thing? Now that we've explained it.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Why don't we try the same
excerpt?
just
okay.
so, anybody watching might sort of have an idea of what we're talking about.
Let me take a quick tuning break.
Okay?
Okay, sure. Let's play it twice. The first way, and then I'll clue us into what's happening in the second.
Okay, so from now until opening till 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's great is we've actually heard all of the building blocks of this movement. The building blocks are this, I don't know what to call it, maybe a riff? Is that fine to say?
Sure.
Brum, ba, 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 brum, and that is threaded through the piece. Then there is sort of a long theme. Jason and Aviva have a priam, 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 priam. And that's extended and transformed later on in the piece, but it's essentially that's it. And then the last thing we played, I don't know what to call this in my mind. It's sort of like lights or pulses. Da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum. And those are the three main elements, and they are reworked and recombined throughout the movement. But let's play it again so everybody can tune their ears into what those things are. Let's have a look at maybe how this combinations of the elements can actually work. Let's head on over to like rehearsal 17. One of the things that Charles is doing is he's putting the material in the different instruments, but having everybody start at sort of a different time. just sort of like a row your boat thing, and using the multiple instruments to create a composite texture. So would you guys mind just playing the beginning of your riff so that everybody can hear who starts it and how the material passes between the instruments?
This is just the quarter note, basically. Okay.
Right, yeah. But that's really weird to play without
It feels weird
without the other following notes.
Yeah.
But you can see that everybody's sort of taking turns starting it, and it is, I don't know, in my mind it's a bit of a wind chime thing. Bling, bong, bong, bling, bong. But could we hear it now with all the notes? And see if you can track that with your eyes and ears with all of it put together. And of course, I'm not doing anything. Well, hold on. I actually do have something to do. I have to play the theme on top of this texture. It's kind of meditative to listen to, if you're not playing it, worrying about all that craziness. Neato.
Neat section, yeah.
We have one more movement, and the piece is framed with a simple movement at the beginning and then this active movement in the middle, and then it returns to simplicity. And Charles clued us into this. He said, you know, I took the end of my first movement and used it to spin out the entire third movement, which I thought was really cool. Let's just play those two parallel passages so that you know that's audible. This would be 4 before 8.
This is in the first movement.
In the first movement, yeah. So the part to pay attention to is Aviva will play, I will play, but then Jason will come in with a melody. And this melody makes the basis of the third movement.
I also play.
Oh.
Just wanted to make sure that.
Oh, okay. I think
That's the start of the third movement.
that's the start of the third movement. I think if I came to this piece for the first time, I might in my mind go, well, it's kind of familiar a little bit, but I don't. It's not. I mean, it's very obvious, but I would need repeated listens to really catch up on that.
Yeah.
And this being a piece that is very meditative, reflective, perhaps remembering, things that happened maybe a long time ago, it makes like a feeling of nostalgia, kind of in like a real way. It's like, oh, I can't quite remember that little theme as it goes in there. So the material for this, again, very simple, a long theme, and then we have a return of the texture from the first movement, but it's now in pizzicato.
Maybe, so that what you're talking about is
Yeah.
this thing in the first movement. we have these, which in the second movement becomes right, the parallel fifths.
Yeah.
And now it is.
Now it's.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's neat. It's in all three in pretty, different ways.
Let's play a bit. Let's play. Let's get everyone kind of used to this. If we play. Oh, let's do our. Why have I lost it? The pickups to rehearsal 5. And just as is. Okay, so this texture is not how we started. Not even close. Could we play it again, but kind of play it how we started when we were first rehearsing it?
Oh, you mean in terms of...
In terms of, I'm going to use a big word.
Okay.
Style.
That's a short word.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
A loaded word.
Yeah, it's only 2 syllables.
So you're saying...
It depends on where you're from.
Are you saying ignore maybe what I know about the piece, or about what conversations with Charles, that sort of thing?
Yes. If, mainly, when we play a piece, we don't have the opportunity to talk to the composer. We have to be detectives.
Mm-hmm.
We have to figure out, okay, what do we think sounds the best? What was going on historically? What were the stylistic ways of playing back then? Do those make sense now? What's emotionally compelling? Like, there's all those questions.
Yeah.
But, like, for somebody like Bach in 1750 or whatever, he would have just been there. And he would have said, hey, no, do it like this. Or, this is what I meant. Sorry, I didn't have time to write it down. It takes a long time to write it down.
Sure.
So we're... now, we get the opportunity to work like that a lot. But let's be... normal musicians, the ones who don't get to talk to the composer.
That's a really passable version.
Yeah.
Right? That could absolutely work. I think and you tell me if I'm shoving words down your mouth. That doesn't make sense. Well, anyway, we as musicians get to work with what's on the page. And a composer has access to only certain things. Notes, key centers, any kind of diagrams if they're going aleatoric, words, depending on how they... We have very few
Expressive
words.
markings, yeah.
The words that we have on the page are peaceful, flowing, reflective. Well, that's tricky. That might mean something that would mean something very different to each of us.
Yeah.
Let alone, what does it mean to Charles? So we have to take context clues, right? And that can be a lot of different things. So in this case, all of a sudden I get 2 pizzas in a row. Ooh, big deal. But it might be to me, if I only ever have 1 pizza, all of a sudden because I have 2, I might think, oh, I need to bring out one of them more than the other. And I think that's a very fair view of it. Jason, the way you might approach it might be very rich sound, because peaceful to you and flowing and reflective might have that kind of richness that is not necessarily an absence of, I'm going to use the word core, but it might be to Aviva, for instance. So arriving at all these different things is, I think, a totally passable thing. And hopefully there is the detective work, I might substitute the word care. That there is the care to figure out what the composer wants. And anything we play, Shostakovich, Bartok, doesn't matter, that we want to find that. And with the living composer, is, like you said, over 100. Is it really over 100 pieces that we've premiered?
It took 20 minutes to count.
Great.
And but yeah, it's more than 100.
I think in each of those, that is the starting point for all of them, is that we bring what we can based on what's on the page, what's in the score, and what our knowledge and experience of life is. And I think that's a passable version, whatever that is, because that's how most music works. Mm-hmm. But then we get this added step of getting to talk to the composer, in this case Charles, who we get to learn what these words mean to him. We get to read into what a lack of a word or a lack of a marking means to him even. And that might sound weird. I don't mean that as a bad thing. I just mean that what else could he do to get us to play a certain way? Mm-hmm. Write a dissertation? Well, no. You have those limits. Look at a Mozart score. There's nothing on there. A Bach score, there's nothing on there. This is this idea of style. That we're making an album for Charles of his music. Boy, we really want to get into his style. And for me personally, that's a challenge. Because I have to then find a way to take his aesthetic values and his heartfelt ways of sound that he has in here, and I have to make that come out of here, and then make that work with my 3 colleagues. That's a really tall order. Mm-hmm. But at the other end, why are we doing it? Mm-hmm. Well, that's what we do every day. And it ties to the concept of the piece, which is it's for a larger thing, a thank you. I don't know. I think that's awesome and challenging. Yeah. And that's a long way of saying the second way we played it could also work. So why are we taking time to talk about how this is wrong in terms of style? Well, because that's obviously a very crass word to use, wrong. But in terms of the way that we arrived to play after working with Charles.
Well, and there's another element in all this too, which is, let's call it the slightly unconscious element, which is if I walk down a hallway of violists, 100 violists, with my eyes closed,
I'm so sorry.
I'm going to know which room is yours. I'll know immediately which room is yours when I pass by it. Now, what does that mean? That means that there's like a collection of things that you do in the way you play that make up the way you sound. That's a great thing. That's really neat. But it also means that there are set like default things that we just do. I think what we played at 5 is a collection of that. Meaning the example when we said, hey, let's play and not worried about, let's just play how we want to play it, or how you might imagine it, or how you might have, if you didn't know any information, how you might play it. That's what that is, I think. And that comes from a whole bunch of unconscious things, like my second finger doesn't vibrate well in this note, and so that's why this note doesn't have vibrato. It is maybe I'm not so great at the tip, or maybe it's playing to your strengths. I have this great sound in this thing. I'm going to take advantage of it. So it's a combination of these unconscious and probably some conscious things, and it's tricky because then we're trying to strip those actually away. In what you're talking about, we're trying to strip that away.
What are some of the specific changes that you guys made between one version and between another version?
I think the lowest hanging fruit for me is no vibrato. Yeah. No vibrato. And well, if I'm thinking about like something that we all will like and dislike things about our own playing, one thing I like about my playing is a wide range of vibrati, if you call it that. Well, so taking that all away sort of feels like stripping away a large strength. Which isn't wrong, it's just something you have to deal with.
Quick tangent for anyone watching. Vibrato. Ugh. Okay. Vibrato is just the oscillation of a note at its core, right? Here's no vibrato. Here's vibrato. But there's character things involved and poetic things involved with it. I want you to hear this vibrato. Now I want you to hear a wider, slower vibrato. This isn't about taste, this is just about hearing. Yeah. Now, I'm going to use a vibrato for a functional thing. I want the note to have electricity and vibrancy, but I don't want you to necessarily hear it. Again, no vibrato. That very quick shimmery vibrato is literally a plug-in, an exciter plug-in that I put into my fingers to make the things come out. So when you're talking about vibrato, there's so many things. It's not just sound, it is function. There's all these things we want them to hear. And then with the group, well, if we want the group vibrato to match, sometimes Ryan has to be wider and faster than Jason, and we have to, it's not as simple as no vibrato or vibrato, and that can make it really tricky because sometimes we've found when we work with composers that say no vibrato, but what they actually mean is they don't want to hear the vibrato.
Sure. Yeah.
You know? And
Yeah.
so it's like, this is where, again, these things are fascinating.
Taking, but yeah, that's a huge library of resources to pull on to be expressive. But how does, with that gone, what else are you relying on? Or is the what's left is
Expressivity
the
comes
bow.
from other things, right?
Yeah.
There are all still ways you can be expressive. Bow, for example. Okay.
How does that change?
Probably as soon as I take away the vibrato, I'm going to try and exaggerate some of the shapes in the bow to show what I want. But here's another example of where actually Charles not necessarily interested in that either. It's more about, blocks of sound. So you're living within a sound world for this phrase rather than transitioning from one into the other, those sorts of things. So it's just, and there are, intonation you can treat it as an expressive thing. We have quite a few tools, but as we slowly start stripping some of those away, it can feel dangerous, or sometimes I would say even like you question how you sound. You know what I mean?
If the only sight or the only sense I can use to determine reality is sight, but I'm blind, that's a problem. Sorry. I just had, you discover things that you haven't enriched so much in your life by taking others away.
Sure.
Well, but then that's a big process of discovery, too, because I know for myself, I would never have arrived at playing these pieces how I do without Charles's input. Mm-hmm. It took me to a place that I think is really, really beautiful, but I know I wouldn't have gone there on my own. Maybe if I lived for 2,000 years, I might, have eventually gone there. But it was such a thing to wrap my head around and learn to be meaningful and expressive without that big library of resources. Like even the tone of the bow changes. Without the vibrato can often warm the tone or make it more supple, and without it, it can be hard, stiff, perhaps a bit artificial, cold. What an interesting way to say thank you. But the piece it's very spiritual. It's very peaceful. Why don't we finish by playing the end? I think maybe a good place is Jason. How do you feel about 12?
That's great.
Well, thanks for joining us for this episode of An Inside Look. You can check out the recording on Centaur Records in 2022. If you're so moved, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. It's one of the best things that you can do. If you like what you hear and see and want to hear more of it, that really helps. And we have a nice event coming up. Sean's going to introduce.
Yes, on February 14th, on Valentine's Day, we will be in Ann Arbor, Michigan at the Blue Llama, where we'll be doing a special set of beautiful, romantic music in all of its categories. Sometimes it's not so friendly, but it's still romantic in a way.
Okay.
And you can join us. You can find a link at our Great Lakes Performing Artists Associates website or the Blue Llama's website, or I think you can find it on our Facebook event. And it is February 14th, and you can get a ticket for that and have a nice hearty meal. And I don't know, maybe you don't want a hearty meal on Valentine's Day, but some kind of food to set up whatever the evening activities will be. And we'll play on Crowdcast, I believe.
Yes.
And it's at 5 p.m.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.